ならば内浜だらも全力で答えよう。豪華滅却樹海降誕。
Welcome back, guys. AnimeScale here, and today we are finally going to be taking a look at one of the coolest characters in Naruto and his vast arsenal of jutsu. Keep in mind that this list will only include jutsu Madara actually used, rather than the ones he potentially could have used. For instance, Madara had access to every single ability his Rinnegan provides. Still, he never really had a reason to use something like the Animal Path summons or the Asura Path weapons. Also, keep in mind that we will be ranking these not just in terms of power, but also on how important they were to Madara in the story. So, let's start with number 20. Edo Tensei is one of the strongest techniques in the entire show. It lets the user summon an army of loyal soldiers who can be as strong as you want. It's not exactly a great deal if you're someone who gets summoned though, unless you are Madara and you know the Edo Tensei release. Using this jutsu, Madara managed to break free from the Edo Tensei, and yeah, while he was free, he was still very much dead and possessed an Edo Tensei corpse. Now, how Madara knew the hand signs to do such a thing remains unknown, since it was stated multiple times that only Tobirama, Orochimaru, and Kabuto knew how to perform this technique. But still, this was a key jutsu for Madara, and so I wouldn't have felt good leaving it out of this list. We've seen only Itachi and Madara using this jutsu. Basically, through the use of Susanoo, the user is able to create chakra projectiles that, due to their structure, act in a similar manner to that of a shuriken, rapidly spinning towards the intended target. For a ninja, with as many ridiculous jutsu as Madara has, even this technique just barely cracks the top 20.
Katon, 豪華滅却。
The Majestic Destroyer Flame is one of the strongest fire-style jutsu in the entire series. That's not only because of the epic-sounding name, though that definitely helps, it's because the size of this thing is absolutely massive. If the scale was the only determining factor, this would probably be the single strong fire jutsu in the show. In the anime, it took several different ninja all using their water jutsu at the same time to barely cancel this thing out. That just goes to show just how strong this thing can be. Wood release in general is one of the strongest nature releases, to the point where only Hashirama and people with his cells can use the thing. The Deep Forest Emergence is probably the single most recognizable wood-style jutsu in the show, and for good reason. Just imagine being able to make a forest any way you want, and that's exactly how this jutsu works. Imagine a tree falling on you and multiply that by a whole forest, and you wouldn't be too far off from the power and the scale of this technique. Oh, and apparently this technique was what Hashirama used to create the Leaf Village, as if it needed any more reason to be included in this list. The last technique was really dangerous because of its scale. I mean, dodging a whole forest does not sound like a good time. This technique, however, sacrifices that scale for much higher speed and power. This wood release technique spawns these gigantic wood tentacles that were not only strong and fast enough to pierce Madara's humanoid Susanoo, but also completely overwhelm it. If that's somehow not enough, this technique also makes several flowers bloom that all spawn poisonous gas everywhere. There really is just no winning with this jutsu. All the different clone techniques in the show are probably some of the most versatile jutsu around. You can basically use a clone for anything you'd rather not do yourself and be completely safe doing it. There's just one problem though: if your clone takes a hit, it's going to disappear. That's why wood release clones are so strong. Unlike other clones, these things can actually take a few hits before popping. That alone makes them many times more useful than they would otherwise be. Oh, and they can sink into trees and be used for reconnaissance. Still, these would be top tier, even if they couldn't do this. We recently talked about the Water Dragon Jutsu on this channel, and everything said about that applies here. I mean, it's a giant wooden dragon that immediately gets several points, just for how cool it looks. Unlike the Water Dragon though, this thing packs way more of a punch. Oh, it also just happens to absorb the chakra of anything it hits. To really give you an idea of how much stronger this thing is though, just remember that the Water Dragon was used at the very start of the show, in the fight between Zabuza and Kakashi. The Wood Dragon was used by Madara to completely subdue Naruto in his Kurama avatar. Nothing more needs to be said here. Black receivers are surprisingly powerful for how simple they seem on the surface. They're quite literally just very strong rods made out of a Rinnegan user's chakra. These things are as strong as swords, easily capable of breaking through steel or piercing enemies. This is until you remember that these rods are better used channeling your chakra through. When used this way, they become much more deadly. Stick a few in someone and you can restrain or even control them. Using the black receivers, Madara was able to restrain Tobirama and even Hashirama himself. These things are a little underrated as they were first used back in the Pain arc, but they are still absurdly useful and powerful. We talked about this jutsu in my latest video. Izanagi is one of the strongest, most broken abilities in all of Naruto since it lets the user rewrite their genjutsu into reality. By sacrificing one of your Sharingan, you can effectively rewrite events a few minutes into the past. This includes minor things like, if you just so happen to die. Madara famously used this technique to survive his fight against Hashirama. He basically set the jutsu to go off after his death. You know, the single event that helped cause all of Naruto. It's pretty safe to say the series will be a lot different without this forbidden jutsu.
Tengai Shinsei.
In terms of first impressions, this might be the single most impressive jutsu in the show. This is probably the point where Shippuden really started to get a little ridiculous. Using this jutsu, the user can summon a giant meteor that is going to destroy absolutely everything for miles. This includes the jutsu user too, which is why Madara used this when he was a reanimation. If somehow, by the grace of God, you happen to stop a gigantic meteor, I hope you have something left that can stop the second one.
さて、2個目はどうする？大野木。ならば、内浜田らも全力で答えよう。
The Susanoo is, as we've talked about before, the ultimate defensive jutsu in Naruto. Using this, you can create a gigantic chakra avatar around yourself that is all but impenetrable. Memes of Jigen kicking Sasuke aside, everyone who wasn't as strong as him didn't have such an easy time handling the Susanoo. What makes them even stronger though, is that every Susanoo has some kind of unique ability that makes them even stronger. Madara's Susanoo is absolutely gigantic, towering over pretty much everything. This Susanoo is strong enough to brush off tail beasts, let alone any ordinary ninja. Oh, and Madara can use several weaker Susanoo at once, if he wants to flex, that is. We've talked about the summoning jutsu often enough on this channel. You form a contract with something, then using some chakra you can summon that something to help you out. The reason this is so high on this list is that unlike everyone else who summons some kind of big animal with special abilities, Madara just straight up summons the 9 tails. Yes, by far the strongest tail beast after the 10 tails, and Madara can summon it whenever he wants. The evil disturbance waltz is one of those techniques that is really only worth using against the strongest of people, seeing as just grazing is going to kill someone else. Yes, this includes even Kage-level opponents. Madara's perfect Susanoo is ridiculous, as we've talked about. Its swords are more than capable of leveling mountains. Clad in Susanoo, Madara hurls his chakra sword at the opponent, swirling like a shuriken. During his battle with Hashirama, Madara had cloaked Kurama in his Susanoo and pierced through the beast's tailed beast balls for a more damaging result.
戦闘イントンライハ
This jutsu is a lot more impressive than it looks on the surface. Combining yin release and nature energy lets Madara shoot out bolts of lightning that are liable to instantly kill anything they hit, and be nigh undodgeable to boot. Unfortunately, by the time Madara first used this technique, Naruto and Sasuke had both received their halves of the Sage's powers. So we never really got to see just how strong this thing could be, only that Madara felt comfortable using it when Naruto and Sasuke came back from the dead. The absorption technique is one of the most underrated Rinnegan powers there are. Everyone remembers things like the almighty push or the planetary devastation, while this always seems to slip under the radar. Jutsu absorption in general is one of the most broken abilities you can have. I mean, half the reason Kara minus Jigen was a threat is because just about everyone could absorb and make jutsu useless. Even Momoshiki was only taken seriously because Naruto and Sasuke couldn't just blast him with something that could level a continent. Madara is more than capable of using the technique, though he's only used it sparingly. He seems like the person who'd rather tank a hit and gloat over it, which is why he didn't abuse this technique more. Truth-seeking orbs are what you get if you make deadly balls that can use all the absorption technique. Yes, these giant spheres instantly negate any jutsu thrown at them, forming a pretty strong defense. If one of these just happens to touch you, you get instantly vaporized. There are really only a handful of characters that can even touch the things without instantly dying, which says a lot about how broken they are. This is another technique that is a lot stronger than most people give it credit for because of when it was used. The lightning fang is what happens when you mix in senjutsu with storm release and fire it like a laser. Remember how we were just talking about how the truth-seeking orbs could negate and tank basically anything? Yeah, this jutsu can cut right through one. Oh, and it's absurdly fast, to the point where it's described as being impossible to dodge. Unfortunately, we saw it being used against Naruto at the very end of the war, where he was literally one of the fastest people ever. The Chibaku Tensei is one of the strongest Rinnegan techniques, and for good reason. Using this, the user can make a giant meteor out of everything in the surrounding area. If you don't get pulled into it and crushed to death, Madara can of course just drop these meteors on you. In fact, 6-pass Madara was able to make dozens of these at once and drop them on Naruto and Sasuke. Limbo is one of the most fascinating techniques on this list, and also my personal favorite. Limbo is just Madara using his Rinnegan to project a shadow of himself into Limbo, an invisible world that coexists with the physical world, but that is ordinarily impossible to detect, perceive, or even physically interact with. With just one of these clones, Madara slapped all Biju at once. There are only 2 known ways of dealing with them. If you have the absurd sensory ability of Naruto after he got Hagoromo's powers, you can sense these clones before they walk behind you and instantly kill you. You still won't be able to see them though. There is one other option. All you need is a Rinnegan, not exactly something that is easy to come by. Yes, this is probably the single strongest clone technique we ever see, and it more than earns a place on the list. The infinite Tsukuyomi is the ultimate genjutsu. It's capable of putting someone in a genjutsu that simulates an entire alternate reality. A reality that's exactly like what they wish for. This isn't something just anyone can resist. Even Naruto had to be shielded by Sasuke's perfect Susanoo from the thing. We do of course have to mention that you can put everybody on the planet under this genjutsu too. Yes, everybody on the planet. Using the moon, Madara was able to cast his jutsu off its surface and subdue almost everyone. In terms of scale, Naruto has never gotten more ridiculous. That's why this is our top entry on this list. That's it for this list, guys. When talking about Madara, there are just way too many techniques to fit all of them in a small top 20, but I did my best. Just be sure to leave your lists down below in the comment section, as well as telling me who you'd like to see covered next in this series. It's AnimeScale out. Bye.
何かを守るためには何かを犠牲にしてしまう。友であろうと兄弟であろうと我が子であろうと。